The year is 2009. You boot up your Wii and check the Wii Shop channel to see if they finally released the Platinum update for My Pokemon Ranch. Or brought over the WiiWare Mystery Dungeon games because you had just finished Explorers of Sky and it was a perfect game. The last thing remaining to scratch that Pokemon itch in the WiiWare section is this little action game called Pokemon Rumble. You download it and it fulfills your most innate primal desires to mash buttons and fight Pokemon, and it has almost infinite replay value due to how quickly you can run through the game and how you can hunt shinies on it. It's almost perfect, but you notice something is missing. Despite using the same 3D models as Ranch in the Mystery Dungeon games, which are actually referred to in the game's files as P, gee, I wonder why they never marketed them towards us as that. Only the Gen 1 Kanto Pokemon and Gen 4 Sinnoh Pokemon are present in the game, leaving all of the precious Gen 2 and Gen 3 Johto and Hoenn Pokemon to starve. Or just not be in Pokemon Rumble. The Gen 2 and 3 erasure in Rumble can be pretty jarring. If you release 5 Porygon, for example, you get a Porygon Z, skipping Porygon 2 entirely. And Bonsly and Chingling are left orphaned in a tower full of ghosts. On the surface, it's as if they treated these two generations as Pokemon that never existed. But with a much deeper look into the game, there are ghosts, or remnants, of these seemingly forgotten Pokemon. And after spending a good period of time last year reverse engineering this game and adding them back in a mod called Weekend Edition, I can say there's evidence that there's a lot more to this story. That maybe they didn't just cut corners to quickly ship out a game that would pander to the Gen 1ers and new Pokemon players. That maybe these Pokemon were all meant to be in the game from the start, and something happened that caused them to have to remove them at the last second. And my current working theory is that it would maybe push the game's file size over the strict 40 megabyte limit that was imposed on WiiWare games. But regardless of what really happened, let's see how deep this Gen 2 and 3 iceberg really goes in Rumble. And I guess I'll also tell you the story of how Weekend Edition came to be, and show off a little bit more of the game's unused content. So our story here starts back in the year 2015. When some friends and I decided to start up this shiny hunting event called Rumble Weekend. During these Rumble weekends, we'd be sitting in a Skype call for hours, and we'd occasionally joke about running into Johto or Hoenn Pokemon, or talk about how sick it would be if we could find someone to mod them into the game for us.
Modded Rumble is something that no one asked for and everybody wants to see.
A couple years down the line, we had a whole laundry list of interesting questions about what was really going on deep within this game, and I decided I'd finally try and take a look for myself to see what I could find. There are already quite a few gecko codes out there online, which effectively act as cheat codes. And the most interesting one to look at was the Pokemon Ticket modifier. This code allows you to receive any Pokemon that you want from the recruitment point, and all you have to do is put in the Pokemon's Pokedex number in hexadecimal to get it. It was at this point where I made my first observation of something really interesting. Something that I'm sure wasn't an actual discovery since these people making the code had to have seen it themselves back in the day, but was still pretty significant. I got the hexadecimal code for Absol's Pokedex number, put it into the gecko code, and the text that appeared on screen was shocking to me. The game actually had the word Absol in it. And then it immediately crashed after I actually tried to do anything with it. But just seeing the name Absol itself was huge to me. This wasn't just a remnant from the Japanese game either, because this was the fully localized English name Absol that was in the game. At this point, I knew I needed to go deeper. The first place I decided to check was for the 3D models. So going off the instructions from an old forum post, I was able to open up the archive and extract all the glorious P from the game. And, to little surprise, there were no Gen 2 or 3 Pokemon in there. I was a little bit bummed at this point, knowing that the 3D model for Absol wasn't there, but I still questioned what actually all was. My friend Avery was also looking through all of these game files and found some interesting stuff, and tagged me in a tweet for it. 2 unused models that were in this P archive. One that was obviously a Pikachu with balloons, which is the iconic flying Pikachu we've seen for so many years, and a more obscure Octillery with some kind of headband. I only just recently this year in 2021 learned the full significance of this, but this was apparently something that was included in the Pokemon Ranch Platinum update to celebrate a certain famous octillery in Japan. There's this guy on the Pokemon Sunday variety show named Golgo, and he did a battle once with an octillery that miraculously survived 2 huge hits with a focus band, and it became such a big meme, I guess, in Japan that they started distributing all sorts of octillery events, and they went as far as to include it in the Platinum update for Ranch. So even though we didn't get that update over here in America, we at least still got that octillery's 3D model deep within Rumble. And there's a whole lot more to this story, and if you want to read more about this octillery, it's really fascinating stuff. There's a whole Chrono Chronicle article about it that I'll link in the description. Octillery is Gen 2, so we were kind of getting somewhere, but I still needed to go deeper. I continued to try and salvage any info I could from the game's files, but I couldn't yet understand the bizarre format the game's scripts were written in. So I decided to take a more hands-on approach to discovery, and used a program called Dolphin Memory Engine to search for certain values while the game was running. I was able to find the spot where a Pokemon's power level was stored and edit it, slowly uncovering all sorts of other attributes I could change about it from the surrounding memory addresses in the process. It was at this point where I genuinely started making discoveries of my own. So first, let's talk moves. One of the first things that I stumbled upon was that the unique versions of moves that the bosses use were actually stored in the game as regular moves, and can be assigned to any Pokemon with memory editing, creating some very destructive results. And there was also a move called Test, which I assume was for debug purposes. And it's not a very powerful move, but it lasts a long time and topples pretty much any Pokemon, making it a very easy recruit. But the real interesting moves that pertain to this whole Gen 2 and Gen 3 story were some signature moves that had no business being in the game, like Latios' signature move Luster Purge. These moves were fully implemented, but were basically unused in the game. There's no reason these moves should be in the game unless they also intended to have the original Gen 2 and 3 Pokemon that use them. I also found a couple things when changing the Pokemon's special traits. There's an unused ability called Dummy, and I honestly have no idea if it actually even does anything, but I think it's kind of funny looking. And there are some leftovers from Japan exclusive event abilities that were in the game that function basically identically to the ability Rally but have special names. In the English version, these names are all just question marked out. Also, if you put in indexes outside the normal bounds of this, you get some pretty funny looking results, but these abilities don't really do anything either. I also found out that just like the main series, every Pokemon has a PID in this game, and every file has its own unique trainer ID/secret ID. These values are stored on the data structure for the Pokemon, but the whole trainer ID part looks a little bit different since it's all just one number. Shininess is still determined with bitwise operations between the PID and the trainer ID though, so by using the PID of one of my shinies I already had on my file, I could make anything shiny. And with this I put a Mew on my Wii Remote, and that's why I've had a shiny Mew on my main file of Rumble for so many years. There were a couple more discoveries about this PID stuff later on, but we'll get there eventually. For now, we have the single most important discovery when it comes to these Gen 2 and 3 Pokemon: species editing. By changing the species of a Pokemon to Absol, I noticed that it became Dark-type, had the right stat distributions, and even started to learn the right moves. The game would only crash when you tried to load up the status screen again or enter a level, which is the point where it would be trying to load the 3D model of Absol. Otherwise, everything was there. And I got even further affirmation of this when I changed a Pokemon species to Spoink, and it actually started to hop around. The framework for these Gen 2 and 3 Pokemon was all fully there. But my efforts to actually add them into the game were pretty fruitless for a while. That is, until 2020 happened. Between starting working from home all the time, being fresh off of a Rumble weekend, and seeing that a team was able to release a fan translation of the WiiWare Mystery Dungeon games, 2020 was the perfect storm for me to really start rumbling. Before then, I always had doubts about actually modding this game, because all I had known about Wii modding was for disc-based games. This Mystery Dungeon translation, though, ignited a fire in me, knowing that this Rumble mod would be fully possible. And I owe a whole lot to this team. I still need to actually play through these myself someday and plan on making some videos on them. But this Mystery Dungeon mod helped out in more ways than one. They also created some tools that allowed me to extract the P from that game and import them into Rumble. And thus began the process of me importing all of these models and textures and obtaining the shiny textures for the Pokemon that can't be shiny in the Mystery Dungeon game and converting them into a format that Rumble could use, and then learning all about the weird scripting format that Rumble uses, one little tiny change at a time, until I started to figure out how the encounter tables worked. And slowly but surely, I was beginning to build what would eventually become Weekend Edition, but not without finding a little bit more unused content in the process. Looking at the encounter tables, I noticed there was something a little bit off with how the game was numbering things. There are 3 main modes in the game: Normal, which is a 0, Advanced, which is 1, and EX, which is 2. But for each of the 4 individual ranks within these modes, C, B, A, and S, it's labeled from 1 to 4. So I began to wonder if there was also a rank 0. And the further that I looked into it, the more that I realized that this rank 0 actually existed. I assumed these 0 level stages were used for debug purposes, and most of them were scrubbed away entirely from the game before the final product shipped, except for one little level in Silent Forest. There was a little caterpie debug room. It's basically a room that's full of caterpie, with no trampoline until you defeat them all. And then when you hop on the trampoline, it starts the level all over again in an infinite loop. It was pretty anticlimactic debugging content compared to the actual framework for the Gen 2 and 3 Pokemon, but deep within all of the game's text strings and messages, there are also remnants of an actual debug menu with all sorts of interesting options. Unfortunately though, I still haven't found a way to access this, and I'm still at this point convinced that this part was removed from the game before it shipped out, aside from the text that just barely remains. But as I unearthed more and more things working on this mod, I found a couple more little pieces of evidence that the Gen 2 and 3 Pokemon were originally meant to be here. And the first was the collection screen. And the code for the collection screen was actually hard-coded in a way to leave out the Johto and Hoenn Pokemon. And by simply removing one line, all 493 Pokemon were then displayed on the collection screen, with barely any other adjustments needing to be made. Also, every single Pokemon with alternate forms, like the Unknown and the Arceus, had their forms already accounted for in the game's code. And I'd say the most impressive little piece of code that remained was for Spinda spots. Every Spinda that you find truly does have a unique pattern based off of its PID, and comparing spot patterns generated by a PID in Rumble with spot patterns generated by that same PID in the main series games, you can see that they accurately implemented the exact placement of the spots on the Spinda. And this was stuff that was just sitting there in the base game with only the Kanto and Sinnoh Pokemon. If you ask me, it's pretty much a no-brainer that they had plans at some point during development to add in the Gen 2 and 3 Pokemon. And now with Weekend Edition, they're all back. But yeah, that's it for this video for right now. I plan on continuing to try and unravel these mysteries within Pokemon Rumble because there's still a lot that's been left unsolved. And I'm going to keep polishing up Weekend Edition as time goes on just because it's a fun little project to work on. I really did plan on making this video a very long time ago, but every time I started writing it out, I was like, nah, I should probably find out more stuff first. So, I guess finally, that has been this video on Rumble's unused content for right now. Maybe more in the future if we find even more. But until then, the 20th Rumble weekend is coming up this weekend from March 12th to 14th, and you know I'm going to be rumbling. And I'm going to be doing the kickoff stream here on YouTube as always, so maybe I'll see you then. But anyway, that's all I have to say for right now, so thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.